July 12, 1944, 6:17 a.m. skis over northern Germany near the outskirts of Merseburg. Flight log. Luftwaffe Jagdgeschwader 7, Me-262 Patrol Sector Delta 7. Altitude 23,000 feet, visibility moderate, scattered clouds forming at 18,000 feet. Temperature, degrees C, wind from northwest at 12 knots. Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Fischer, leading element of 3 Me-262s, radio silence protocol in effect. Today, the mission had been briefed as a routine reconnaissance escort, yet the tension in the cockpit was palpable. Whispers of the Allied P-51 Mustangs' uncanny performance had reached the squadron during debriefings over the past week. As Karl-Heinz banked sharply over the eastern ridge, he noticed the early signs of the approaching bombers. Four-engine heavies with precise formations, contrails already etched into the morning sky. His radio crackled faintly. Corporal Heinrich shouted a warning about a Mustang sighting to the east, but Karl-Heinz's focus remained trained on the tracers of a previous day's engagement. Memories of a comrade, Lieutenant Brandt, shot down yesterday over Leipzig, replayed in his mind. Brandt had veered off protocol, diving to protect a straggling reconnaissance aircraft, and now his empty cockpit was a ghost on the radar logs. Karl-Heinz clenched his jaw, feeling the edge of protocol friction as he realized he might have to make a similar emotional decision, abandoning altitude advantage for a fleeting chance to intercept a Mustang threatening an Allied bomber. He nudged the throttle forward, Me-262's twin Jumo 4 engines screaming at near full RPM. The afterburners screamed like a banshee across the morning haze, the fuselage vibrating with every surge of thrust. As he closed in on the P-51, a shocking realization hit him. The Mustang, despite lacking the jet's theoretical top speed of 540 mph, was accelerating past him, gaining a speed differential of nearly 50 miles per hour. Karl-Heinz's hands froze on the stick. Aerodynamic reports and wind tunnel calculations had predicted superiority over propeller-driven fighters, yet here was the reality. Prop planes outrunning jets in the hands of skilled pilots who had mastered the P-51's laminar flow wings and Packard-built Merlin engines. The Mustang dipped and weaved, exploiting energy retention in dives, and Karl-Heinz tried to anticipate its vectors. He toggled the nose-mounted Mk-108 cannons, estimating deflection angles, but the distance closed far too quickly for standard gunnery solutions. Around him, Heinrich and the other Me-262 pilot attempted similar intercepts, but each maneuver only seemed to widen the Mustang's separation. The Allied pilots, aware of the jet's weakness in acceleration and turn rate at lower altitudes, executed sharp climbs followed by high-speed dives, exploiting gravity and the P-51's lighter wing loading. And for a few tense moments, the Me-262s became reactive rather than commanding, each decision a gamble against physics and human error. Karl-Heinz's mind raced. The Jumo 4's thrust lag in throttle response was unforgiving. One mistimed roll, and he could be tumbling into a spin at 25,000 feet with no recovery. Yet the impulse to protect the bombers, to honor Brandt's sacrifice, overrode the manual of strict protocol. He banked sharply, feeling the fuselage twist under aerodynamic stress, and the gunsight tracked the Mustang, but it danced away effortlessly, engine whine replaced by the whoosh of air and the distant thunder of Allied formations. Below, the fields and river bends of Merseburg passed in a blur, smoke rising from anti-aircraft flak already raining on bomber formations. Karl-Heinz caught a glimpse of a P-51 skimming the cloud base, pulling lead in an almost impossible turn. The jet shuddered under repeated high-G maneuvers, the metal groaning audibly, yet it held. Another Mustang, approaching from 12 o'clock, closed rapidly, forcing him into an emergency split-test. The G-forces pressed him into the cockpit, vision narrowing, breath ragged. This was no longer a battle of machines, but of nerve, skill, and the desperate instinct to survive while honoring fallen comrades. As he struggled to match the Mustang's velocity, Karl-Heinz noted the limitations of the Me-262 in sustained dogfight. Wings were prone to flutter under stress. Engines could flame out if throttled too quickly, and the airframe was optimized for high-speed straight-line attacks rather than the tight-turning engagements the Mustangs excelled in. He cursed under his breath, realizing that decades of engineering predictions could not account for the intuitive handling and calculated aggression of these Allied pilots. The Mustang banked violently, climbing to regain energy advantage, while Karl-Heinz forced his aircraft into a shallow dive to gain speed, estimating a difference in acceleration rates that defied every textbook explanation he had memorized. The radio squawked intermittently with the chatter of other German units, pilots reporting hits, misses, and flak bursts. Karl-Heinz ignored it, fixated on the white streaks cutting through clouds, Mustangs exploiting every aerodynamic nuance, every small lapse in jet responsiveness, every microsecond of hesitation. In that moment, the sky itself seemed a cruel referee, punishing the Me-262's theoretical dominance with brutal practicality, exposing weaknesses that were irrelevant in simulations but lethal in real airspace. He recalled previous engagements, the ones that left him sleepless. Jet pilots, overconfidence, trusting raw speed as an absolute, only to be humbled by the precision and adaptability of well-trained propeller aces. A Mustang veered into his 6 o'clock and instinct took over. He yanked the stick, twisting violently, feeling the air rip over the wings, metal straining, hydraulic lines whistling. Tracers passed him mere feet away, sparks kissing fuselage edges, flak exploding in the distance, clouds now a labyrinth of smoke, contrails, and airborne debris. The emotional weight of Brandt's death compounded the technical dilemma. Karl-Heinz's desire to emulate that sacrifice, to intervene and shield the bombers, fought against the cold calculus of engine limits, maneuverability, and survival. In those moments, he noted the tactical genius of the Mustang pilots, utilizing energy tactics, hit-and-run attacks, and superior maneuverability at medium altitudes to nullify jet speed. Each pass brought him closer to exhaustion, both physical and mental. The Me-262 was fast, lethal in straight-line bursts, but in a prolonged engagement with these Mustangs, it became painfully clear that raw engineering prowess could not substitute for skill, courage, and the audacity of human decision-making. Karl-Heinz's cockpit grew hotter despite the chill outside. Instruments vibrated violently. The G-meter pinned with every evasive maneuver, and sweat stung his eyes. He toggled the radio again, considering a call to regroup with Heinrich and the other Me-262 pilot, but hesitation meant separation from the formation, isolation in a sky where mistakes were fatal. Yet he pushed on, diving and climbing in desperate choreography, tracing arcs dictated by physics and instinct, each maneuver a silent prayer for Brandt's memory, each near miss a testament to the deadly dance of war. The ground below was a patchwork of villages, fields, and factories, all potential targets, all potential hazards, and each minute stretched into eternity as he measured acceleration, turn radius, wing loading, and relative velocity. Somewhere in the distance, bombs detonated, anti-aircraft fire erupted, and the orchestra of destruction underscored the human drama unfolding in his cockpit. He realized with grim clarity that the P-51 pilots' ability to outmaneuver, outpace, and evade was not an anomaly. It was a lesson, brutal and unforgiving, that engineering alone could not dictate battlefield outcomes. Every climb, dive, roll, and bank was a conversation between man, machine, and physics, a negotiation for supremacy in a sky where death waited patiently. As the Me-262 shuddered from repeated high-speed dives and the Mustangs danced just beyond the reach of its cannons, Karl-Heinz felt a cold sense of inevitability. That heroism in the air required more than speed, more than guns, more than protocol. It required a balance of courage, intuition, and acceptance that sometimes the enemy could outthink, outmaneuver, and outrun even the most advanced machinery humanity could devise. The morning sun broke through the clouds, glinting off aluminum wings and metal skin, illuminating the staggering reality of the encounter. A squadron of jets, technically superior, yet humbled by the artistry, timing, and sheer daring of propeller-driven pilots, each Mustang a testament to the unpredictable, unforgiving, and profoundly human dimension of aerial warfare. And Karl-Heinz, gripping the stick with knuckles white, knew that this engagement would be etched into his mind as a lesson in both loss and awe, a memory where calculation met instinct, metal met air, and the human heart defied even the coldest metrics of engineering. The chase continued over the patchwork of the Thuringian countryside, dense forests giving way to open farmland, smoke rising in thin plumes from strafed rail lines and shattered villages, the smell of cordite and burning fuel invisible but omnipresent, seared into the air by the detonations of anti-aircraft flak that punctuated the sky like a relentless metronome of death. Karl-Heinz felt every vibration of the Me-262 through his seat, every strain of the airframe under the torque of aggressive turns and abrupt dives, each throttle adjustment a negotiation with engines known to respond sluggishly, sensitive to abrupt inputs, yet capable of propelling him at speeds that made the Mustang's audacity all the more astonishing. He recalled the theoretical advantages the jets held: higher top speed, faster climb rates, heavier armament, and the psychological shock of jet noise and velocity. Yet these advantages were mitigated by the pilot's human limitations: reaction time, judgment under stress, and the weight of emotions that refused to be calculated on flight tables. As he pursued one Mustang attempting a high-speed, shallow dive to escape the Me-262's line of fire, Karl-Heinz felt the aircraft's wings begin to flex beyond what he had ever considered comfortable, the fuselage vibrating with the cumulative stress of repeated G-loads, the cockpit instruments flickering under the tension. The Mustang pilot's every action seemed deliberate, almost prescient, rolling at the precise angle to bleed speed without losing altitude, diving just enough to prevent the jet from closing the gap, yet not so sharply as to induce blackout or stall. Karl-Heinz realized, amid the blur of cloud and ground, that the very physics of the engagement were rewriting the rules he had learned. The P-51's laminar flow wings, the perfectly timed throttle adjustments, the pilot's intuition were combining to produce a performance no simulation had predicted, a practical aerodynamics lesson taught in live fire and death. Around him, Heinrich radioed a terse update, voice trembling slightly as flak bursts rocked the formation, fragments pinging against fuselage and canopy. Another Me-262 had been forced to disengage after a near collision with a Mustang executing an aggressive split test, its maneuver exploiting the jet's slower roll rate. Karl-Heinz ignored caution for a moment, eyes locked on the Mustang climbing toward a cloud bank, calculating intercept vectors on the fly, mentally measuring energy retention versus altitude gain, factoring in the delay of JUMO 4 response and wing loading under high-speed bank. Each maneuver was a calculus of life and death, the human brain translating milliseconds of motion into instinctive commands to an airframe designed to outrun, not outturn, its opponent. Then came the visceral moment of impact realization. The Mustang outpaced him again, this time by a margin that forced him to consider abandoning the chase entirely or risk structural failure. His chest tightened as he recalled Brandt's sacrifice, the emotional gravity pulling him toward action against all protocol. He pushed the Me-262 harder, the engines screaming in protest, afterburners straining, hopping to make up the speed deficit to at least threaten the Mustang's flight path, to assert dominance in a theater where dominance had been assumed by jet superiority. Clouds now enveloped the aerial ballet, water droplets condensing on canopy, limiting visibility, each turn and roll fraught with peril. The sky became a three-dimensional chessboard of evasive maneuvers, altitude trading, and split-second decision-making. Karl-Heinz could feel the tension radiating from his fellow pilots, each one balancing the imperative to engage the enemy with the instinct to survive. They were acutely aware that every second spent out of position was another opportunity for the Mustang to exploit the jet's sluggish low-speed acceleration and turn radius. Time stretched as he executed a near-vertical climb followed by a high-speed dive, measuring the energy retention and the G-forces that threatened to render him unconscious. The Mustang responded with uncanny precision, climbing into the sun to mask its approach, weaving with a fluidity that belied the mechanical simplicity of a propeller-driven fighter. Karl-Heinz thought of the statistics he had memorized, the performance tables, the wind tunnel data, all of which now seemed irrelevant under the raw, kinetic theater of combat. The JUMO engines groaned under repeated throttling, the airframe rattling under strain, yet the human element, the split-second anticipation, the willingness to push boundaries, proved as critical as any mechanical advantage. Then came the psychological pivot. Karl-Heinz noticed a slight overextension by the Mustang, a momentary miscalculation in energy management. He seized the opening, banking sharply, gunsight aligned, calculating lead for Mk-108 cannons firing high-velocity shells with explosive payloads capable of shredding fuselage and wing spars. The distance closed rapidly, the air roaring past, adrenaline and fear blending into a singular focus. Yet even in this fleeting opportunity, the Mustang pilot demonstrated skill honed through thousands of hours. An evasive roll, a precise throttle adjustment, energy retention through a shallow dive, and Karl-Heinz realized he was witnessing the apex of propeller fighter piloting, an art that no jet, regardless of speed, could fully dominate in the complexity of a real-world engagement. The Me-262's theoretical supremacy was being methodically neutralized by human skill, tactical intelligence, and an instinctive understanding of aerodynamics in action. Over the fields below, the ground war continued unnoticed. Supply trucks ablaze, defensive positions collapsing under artillery, civilians fleeing the advancing front lines, each event echoing the broader chaos of a war that was both mechanical and profoundly human. Karl-Heinz's mind struggled to reconcile the dualities of technology and emotion, the cold efficiency of engineering versus the raw unpredictability of living, thinking adversaries, the safety of protocol against the compelling force of loyalty and grief, speed as a metric of superiority versus adaptability as a measure of survival. And then, in the crescendo of aerial ballet and emotional reckoning, Karl-Heinz pressed forward, abandoning caution, embracing the dangerous calculus of honor, vengeance, and instinct, each second stretching into eternity as the sky became a crucible where man, machine, and courage collided, leaving nothing but the roar of engines, the crackle of tracers, and the indelible imprint of human will against the relentless tyranny of physics and war. Karl-Heinz's pursuit stretched across miles of cloud-strewn sky, every second a brutal negotiation between human instinct and mechanical limitation. The Mustang, still outpacing him, executed a final, audacious maneuver, a high-speed, shallow dive weaving between cloud layers, exploiting every ounce of energy retention and aerodynamic advantage it could muster. Karl-Heinz pushed the Me-262 to its absolute limits, throttles pinned, wings screaming under the stress, his vision tunneling under G-forces, hands white on the stick. He fired a burst from the Mk-108s, tracers cutting through the haze, but the bullets passed mere feet behind the agile Mustang, which banked sharply and vanished into the morning sun, leaving Karl-Heinz staring at empty sky, engines whining in protest, heart hammering, lungs burning, adrenaline coursing through every vein. In that silence, broken only by the hum of his failing engines and distant explosions below, he felt the crushing weight of the truth. The P-51s, propeller-driven and seemingly inferior on paper, had proven that human skill, instinct, and tactical ingenuity could outmatch even the most advanced jet technology. He unclenched his jaw, sweat stinging his eyes, and allowed himself a moment of bitter awe. The lessons of this engagement were seared into memory, far beyond any flight manual, beyond any engineering chart. As he guided the Me-262 back toward base, wings still trembling from stress and overexertion, Karl-Heinz reflected on the cruel irony of the day. A squadron of jets, designed to dominate the skies, humbled not by mechanical failure but by human brilliance. The war continued below, bombs falling, smoke rising, lives extinguished. Yet in the upper atmosphere, the invisible duel had left an indelible mark on all who bore witness. Karl-Heinz touched the controls lightly now, fatigue mixing with a solemn respect for the enemy, understanding that speed alone does not guarantee victory. Courage, adaptability, and the relentless pursuit of mastery often tip the scales in the theater of war. And as the sun climbed higher, glinting off distant Me-262s returning to base, he knew that today would be remembered, not as a day of triumph, but as a day of revelation. The P-51 Mustang, elegant, propeller-driven, and piloted with unparalleled skill, had outflown a jet by 50 miles per hour, rewriting assumptions, challenging pride, and leaving the Luftwaffe to reckon with the humbling truth that technology, no matter how advanced, could never fully substitute for the audacity, instinct, and brilliance of the human mind in combat. The log would record the engagement, statistics and observations, but the emotional truth, the fear, the awe, the grief, and the respect, would remain unquantifiable, etched into memory, a silent testament to the unpredictability and enduring human element of aerial warfare, a lesson that would resonate in the cockpits and hearts of every pilot for the remainder of the conflict. The Me-262 settled onto the runway at Merseburg, engines groaning in exhaustion, flaps quivering from stress, and Karl-Heinz removed his helmet, letting the weight of adrenaline drain, his hands shaking slightly, eyes distant. Heinrich approached, a mixture of relief and disbelief in his expression, and without a word they both understood the same thing, that the myth of unassailable superiority had been shattered that morning in the chaos of clouds, the dance of machines, and the bravery of men willing to push beyond protocol, beyond fear, beyond the cold calculations of engineers. Somewhere in the distance, the remnants of the engagement drifted toward horizon, anti-aircraft bursts fatting, Mustangs disappearing into the blue, yet the lesson remained stark and vivid. Speed alone could not win a war. It was skill, courage, and the human spirit that ultimately dictated the outcome. The log would record time, altitude, speeds, and maneuvers, but the intangible truth of the battle, the emotional decisions, the sacrifices, the lessons learned at the edge of human endurance, would live on in the stories of pilots, whispered in debriefings, written in diaries, and remembered in the quiet reflection of those who had flown that day when propeller and jet collided in a deadly, humbling, and unforgettable dance. The war raged on, but Karl-Heinz knew that nothing in his experience, nothing in the manuals, could ever erase the memory of the Mustangs that outpaced him, 50 miles per hour faster, leaving a mixture of awe, respect, and the profound realization that the human element, unpredictable, daring, brilliant, remained the ultimate arbiter in the skis of war.